Years ago, I was performing a wedding, and someone came up to me during the reception. About 40, stocky, and with light brown hair and eyes, the man seemed friendly, but maybe a little bit sad. He introduced himself, and for the purpose of the story, I will call him John. John asked if I would mind meeting him for coffee. With very little pretext for the meeting, I agreed. And I tell his story today with his permission. After agreeing to meet, the two of us sat across from each other in Pete's in downtown Livermore. People buzzed by us, the espresso machine hummed and steamed, and the scent of coffee hung in the air. It struck me how out of place this conversation was, how intimate and serious in a place that was casual and friendly. John told me he was angry. He had grown up in an alcoholic home, and from what he described, his parents were unpredictable, selfish, and self-destructive. When John left home, he promised himself that he would never look back. After a few attempts to reach out to him, his parents stopped calling. In his first years after leaving home, his anger was raging and volcanic. He hated them, and he spent a lot of time telling other people this. But over the years, the volcanic anger cooled off into a sort of lingering, stinging smoke, an anger that turned inward. Today, it looked a lot more like a practiced indifference. But the anger was still there, just buried. In the months before we met, something strange happened, though. He started thinking about his parents frequently. And about the same time that this happened, something even more unexpected occurred. He got home from work, took his golden retriever out for a walk, and as he was returning from the walk, he opened his mailbox. He stood in the doorway sorting through bills and junk mail. At the bottom of the stack was a plain white envelope. It had no return address on it, but he could recognize the handwriting anywhere. It was his mother's. I will return to John's story in a little while. I can't hear the famous Ecclesiastes passage without thinking of the Byrds' pop music rendition. I don't know about you guys. To everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. I admit that I do not have a particular fondness for this song. Indeed, I don't mean to offend anybody, but I find it a little bit annoying. But the iconic tune is one that comes to mind every single time I hear that passage. Most agree that Ecclesiastes 3 is a celebration, or perhaps a resignation, to the fact of impermanence. There is a season for each thing under heaven, it says. Everything changes. Things pass into existence, and then they pass out of existence. The author acknowledges that there is much in this life that we do not have control over. Acquiescent to this fact, he suggests turning over the need to control these larger patterns of creation and destruction. He suggests turning it over to God. But a line in the passage has always puzzled me, and that's what got me thinking about this sermon today. It's always made me wonder. It reads, "There is a time to gather up stones, and there is a time to throw them away." What does it mean to gather up stones and throw them away? Why is this line folded into the famous reflection on there being a season for everything under the sun. I went on a bit of a scavenger hunt to find the answer this week. Unfortunately, there is no unanimity about the answer. Lots of writers have proposed different solutions. Some suggest it is an agricultural metaphor, that it has to do with gathering up the stones in a field before plowing it. Others argue that it has to do with the frequent displacement of the ancient Israelites. They might gather up stones in order to build a home and then tear those stones down and scatter them when they are forced to leave. Whatever the original intent, the imagery is evocative. We gather up stones and then we cast them away. It's a metaphoric image as much as it is a historical one. To me, it seems to beg a question, to tell us to ask ourselves, what stones have we gathered up, and which stones do we need to cast aside? This has been a hard summer for me. The remaining generation of my grandparents has been wiped out. It started in May with the death of my great aunt, and then proceeded to take my maternal grandmother in late July. And then this week, I received the message that my paternal grandmother had died as well. I am lucky that I have a strong family and network of friends that I have gotten a lot of support from. But it's no surprise that I've been thinking a lot about loss recently. And what I'm noticing about loss and death this time around is a feeling of unfinishedness. It is interesting because my grandparents both lived long and fruitful lives, and yet there is still for me a feeling that there should have been another conversation, another walk through the park, another trip to our favorite breakfast place. I'm starting to think that this is part and parcel of losing someone that we love. So often there is a feeling of incompleteness that attaches itself to a death, a feeling that we just need a little more time. Every life is a book that doesn't get its last chapter. And even if we have read that same book again and again, there will be footnotes and appendices and secret things tucked between the pages that we will have missed. A life is never complete or done or known fully. Mark Nepo, in his poem Heartwood, describes it this way. My friend has died and the grass is growing as I watch the logs dry and crack in the garage. Yesterday, I saw a lone worm leave the heartwood as if waiting till it was safe. I wonder what lone secret left Steve's heart after he died before the medics arrived. Is it hiding in his closet or in our grief? Is this the relentless, resilient way that what survives moves from one carrier to the next? There are buds on the maple even though it is October. Even wet concrete seems beautiful. If I knew the right question, I'd ask it of everyone. His poem holds this truth, that every life is more full and more complete than we know. And in that sense, the attendant of every death is a feeling of incompleteness, of unfinished business, of a secret yet to be told, and a question that can never be asked. I got to sit with both of my grandmothers when I was in Cincinnati this summer. And with my paternal grandmother, who was more lucid, I got to hold her hand and talk with her. I sat there and felt her skin as thin as paper against mine. The room of the nursing home was Spartan, though her windowsill was covered in the miniature furniture and tiny houses and little scenes of everyday life that she so loved. As I held her hand, I wondered if there was anything that I needed to say to her before I left, sensing that this might be the last time. And the only thing I could think of saying was what I always said to her, which is that I loved her. And looking back on that moment, I realized that that is a signal to me that I do not have regrets with my grandmother. There are no stones I'm holding on to that need to be cast away. There is heartache and a general sense of incompleteness, but there is no regret or remorse for specific things that I did or left undone. The UC Berkeley philosopher R.J. Wallace writes extensively about regret in his book, The View from Here. Wallace discovers that people can experience very different forms of regret. For example, we might regret that someone did not live longer or that a friend lost her job. In these instances, it might very well be appropriate to feel sadness for the other person, even though we did not have a direct hand in making the situation happen. This is a kind of regret that we do not have an obligation to do anything about ourselves, though it's not something that we need to fix, except perhaps that we might be kind to ourselves amidst this form of regret, and we might be kind to others as well. But this differs from the kind of regret for things that stem from our actions, that stem from what we do or leave undone. For instance, we might regret that we said unkind things to a friend or that we didn't help someone when we could have made a difference. That, Wallace writes, is a specific kind of regret, a regret for things that we did have the power to change. It's remorse. It is a kind of regret that we had the agency to do something about in the past. And Wallace argues that just as we had the agency to do something about it in the past, so do we have the agency to do something about it today. For that kind of regret, we can ask forgiveness of others. Wallace finds it important to disentangle these two kinds of regret so that we can decide how to move forward with our lives. Clarity on whether we are experiencing this more general kind of regret or if we're experiencing remorse for past actions is essential. It won't do us much good, he suggests, to obsess over fixing a wrong that we couldn't have prevented in the first place. Nor will it be honest to delude ourselves into thinking that there is nothing that we could have done or can do now about harm that we created in the past. The late Unitarian Universalist minister Forrest Church once wrote that the saddest words in the English language are, "if only." It is uttered by people who have come to believe that there is no solutions for the things that they had a part in. If only I had reached out to my children when they needed me. If only I had considered the needs of my spouse when I broke her trust. If only I had stopped a soul-destroying habit before it damaged the people around me. But the truth is that there is something that can be done about remorse. There is the possibility of changing it. In those instances, we can reach out to the ones that we love and ask for forgiveness. It doesn't change the way the story began, but it does change the way that it ends. John sat for a while holding the letter, contemplating whether he wanted to open it or not. He had not heard from his parents in 20 years. He didn't know whether he wanted to bring whatever was in their lives into his. He pondered throwing the letter in the trash, but he couldn't. He tore off the corner, patiently unfolded it, and saw about a page of his mother's handwriting. It was simple and clear. She had stopped drinking a year ago. She was in a 12-step program, and she wanted to reach out and make amends. She named the specific wrongs, the destructive drinking, the many regrets that she had. And she said that she understood if John didn't want to see her, but if he did, she would like it very much. The scenery in Pete's had dropped away for us as John recounted this incredible story. So what are you going to do with this information, with knowing this? I asked him. He shrugged. That's what he was trying to figure out. We talked a little while longer, and John did not come to a clear resolution on how and under what conditions he might like to see his mother again. He thought that he would like to. He was very much leaning in that direction, but he still had a lot to figure out. But John then told me something surprising. He said that he felt something shift inside him when he read that letter. The anger, buried deep in there for so long, seemed to melt. He could not find it anywhere, no matter how hard he looked, no matter how far down he dug. This letter seemed to be the last little bit that he needed in order to go free. There is a time to gather up stones and a time to cast them away. This week is Yom Kippur. It will be celebrated on Tuesday by many of our friends. It is the Jewish High Holy Day of Atonement. This day encourages people to seek forgiveness and to go forward with a renewed heart. And so each of you has been given a stone. Does everybody have their stone? All right. Today, I invite you to reflect on a regret that you can let go of. Is it something that perhaps you did not have control over, but need to let go of nonetheless? Is it something that you need to say to someone else, some amends that you need to make this week? As you consider that question, hold on to the stone in one hand and say with me the Litany of Atonement, number 637 in the gray hymnal. I'll read the plain text and I invite you to read the italics. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again on love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again on love. For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again on love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again on love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit. For losing sight of our unity. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of our separateness. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Later this week, when you have left this place, cast away that stone.